Hello, Jeff, 55, with the Appliance Hospital. I wanted to make a quick follow-up video to show how to determine which connector to use for the LG software update if or when you run across a main control board with unlabeled pins on CON 202. And as gravy, include some nerdy bits that did not make the final cut from the last video. The newest version of the yellow obstruction sheet covers one method to deal with unmarked pins, but I read through it 3 or 4 times before I understood what they were telling us to do. We'll try to make sense of their method, and I'll offer up another method that works on almost any board to find and identify VCC and ground rails. On the quick start sheet, LG shows that to check for connector wiring, no mark, to measure the resistance between CON 202 pins 1 and 2 and between pins 2 and 3. And if the resistance from pins 1 to 2 is greater than the resistance from pins 2 to 3, that we'll use the white TX Molex. Otherwise, if the resistance from 1 to 2 is less than the resistance from 2 to 3, that we'll use the red VCC Molex. Well, that's true, and we're going to quickly show why it's true. Total aside, but here they mention rotating the compressor connector. Thought experiment, try rotating a 3-pin connector 45 degrees as they show. How'd that work out? But I digress. Back to the task at hand. This method relies on the fact that both the TX and the RX lines use pull-up resistors, each tied to VCC. I've drawn them here as 10Ks, which seems to be typical. Here, pin 1 is TX, so when we measure resistance between pins 1 and 2, we're measuring across 2 resistors. So we measure 20K, 10 plus 10. When we measure between pins 2 and 3, we're probing across a single resistor, so we measure 10K. We go back to the cheat sheet. Resistance between pins 1 and 2 is greater than between pins 2 and 3, so they tell us to use the white Molex because pin 1 is TX, which it is. Pretty clever, LG. Nice test. We can use the same test if pin 1 is VCC. So pins 1 to 2 only see one resistor, so we measure 10K. Pins 2 to 3 run through both resistors, so we see 20K. 10 plus 10. 1 to 2 is less than 2 to 3, so we know that pin 1 is VCC. When I ran into this unlabeled CON 202 connector, I was working off of this cheat sheet, which conspicuously does not show any no-mark instructions. This one weird trick, though, can be useful in reverse engineering boards and other hardware with an unmarked DC rail. These are electrolytic capacitors, and the negative stripe or mark tells us that they're polarized, that they can only be powered up one way. Electrolytic caps are used for heavy filtering of power supplies in a small and cheap package, so we'd expect to find at least one between VCC and ground on our main control, likely in this cluster near CON 202. We'll flip the board over to the trace side, and probing around a little bit, we'll see that pin 3 is directly connected to this leg of this capacitor. Back on the component side of the board, we see that pin is opposite the negative stripe, so it's the positive pin, which tells us that we found VCC. These other electrolytic caps are filtering for other voltage rails, but we know none of them are connected to the TX or RX lines because they'd filter the signals on those lines out, and they'd no longer be transmitting data. So there you have it. 2 different methods for dealing with unmarked pins on the LG compressor firmware update. What follows is some unnarrated extra footage, which will make no sense without context. Thanks for watching. Good luck.